Hi everyone, Avrengost here, this time giving you a complete character creation guide for beginners for Solasta 2. The game is currently in its first early access iteration, so it's subject to changes and has limited features, but it already has a solid foundation I think it will carry forward. I believe this game shows a lot of promise, but like often happens for rules-heavy RPGs, it can be overwhelming for new players. It implements the 2024 rule set update for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons in its free system reference document version. It carries a few modifications that impact the character creation process, and being a relatively recent version, there is a good chance quite a few players are not familiar with it. For this guide, I'm going to assume you have zero knowledge of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to help the largest number of players approach Solasta 2. While this guide is made specifically for this game, a lot of it will naturally overlap with the tabletop character creation process, since the two are strongly connected. Solasta 2, just as the first game, is a bit unusual in the way that it asks you to create your entire party of 4 adventurers, like some older CRPGs used to do. So, you're going through this process 4 times. You'll find some temporary companions along the way while playing the game, but your core party will always be made up of the characters you build at the beginning. So having a good understanding of the character creation process is quite important if you want to have a less frustrating run. Especially if you want to play at authentic difficulty, I'm going to guide you through the entire process to the best of my abilities. I'll link references in the video description so you can quickly check some data while playing. The game allows you to choose among pre-generated characters or to create your own party through a quick creation process or an advanced one. The quick creation is functional. It allows you to choose your character's class, ancestry, which is race, and background without worrying about ability scores, proficiencies, and spells. As said, it's functional and there is nothing wrong with using it, but you end up with the stereotyped characters and you may want more than that. That's the reason why I'm going to explain the advanced character creation process step by step, so you can create the character you want with more leeway. I'll put chapters in the description below so you can jump to the part that's most confusing for you. Without further ado, let's dive in. Our first choice is selecting our character's class. The early access version of Solasta 2, at the time I'm recording this video, features 6 classes: Cleric, Fighter, Paladin, Rogue, Sorcerer, and Wizard. More are planned to be added before the game's full release to test them out. When we select a class, on the right column of the UI, we are presented with quite a bit of information that can feel like a lot all at once, but we're going to calmly go through it one by one. First of all, we have a few colored tags that explain the class roles, plus some useful information. For example, the Cleric is identified as a strong healer, plus some secondary frontliner and supporter roles that are not as strong. By contrast, a Paladin has a strong frontliner role and less of a healer one. Then we have the core abilities for the class, the ones we should build our character around. There can be only one, like Wisdom for the Cleric, or more, like Strength and Charisma for the Paladin. Or they can also be one of two, like the Fighter, which can be built around Strength or Dexterity, depending on whether we want a strong frontliner or maybe a dual-wielding fast striker who attacks from the flanks. A fighter who uses ranged weapons would be dexterity-based too. The complexity tag gives you an overview of how difficult the class can be to play for a novice. We may note that classes that include some amount of spellcasting have a higher difficulty tag, mostly due to an increased number of choices to make both in character creation and on the battlefield. Immediately following is the hit die type, which is very important since it determines the character's hit points. You gain 1 hit die every time you gain a level, increasing your hit point pool. We can see that sorcerers and wizards have a d6 for it, making them squishier, while true frontliners like the paladin or the fighter have a d10, making them harder to take down. Then we have the proficiencies our class grants. Broadly speaking, proficiencies are what our character is good at. You can't be good at everything, so we have to specialize. Every character has a proficiency bonus, a flat number we add when we make a roll in something they're good at, and it increases as our characters level up. Looking at this column, we meet the saving throw proficiencies first, which are ways for our character to avoid detrimental effects. There are 6 types of saving throws, each one connected to one of our abilities. The 6 abilities determine how our character is built, and are the classic 6 D&D has been using for decades. They're pretty self-explanatory, and we'll talk more about them later, when we need to assign points to them. Back to our column, every class is proficient in 2 of these saving throws. For example, you roll a Constitution saving throw to avoid being poisoned, or a Dexterity one to avoid the bulk of the damage from most traps you might set off. When we roll to see if our character gets poisoned, we roll d20 and then add their constitution modifier, trying to meet or beat the difficulty class the game assigns to that poison, which can be 10, 12, 15, 20 for a very deadly one, and so on. If our character is proficient in constitution saving throws, we also add our proficiency bonus to the roll. We can see in the footage that Javelin has a +3 constitution bonus, and his constitution saving throw is +5 total since he's a fighter and is proficient in it. On the contrary, he's not proficient in dexterity saving throws, so his bonus is just 0, his base dexterity modifier. These saving throw proficiencies are all built around the class core concept. For instance, a fighter is difficult to poison, weaken, and restrain on the battlefield, which makes sense. Then we have a list of skills our class provides us to be proficient in, and we have to choose a few. The exact number depends on our class, since some are more oriented towards skill-based gameplay, like the rogue, so they have more proficiencies at their disposal. Every skill is influenced by an ability. For example, athletics depends on strength, while investigation depends on intelligence. Skill modifiers are based on the ability that influences them, using their modifiers just like we did for saving throws, then adding the proficiency bonus if we happen to be proficient in them. For a visual example, we can see here that Darroch has a perception bonus of +4, given by her wisdom of +2, and her proficiency bonus for another +2. There are 18 skills in total on our character sheet, and I'm not going to explain them all to avoid overwhelming you. Most are intuitive. For example, Arcana is helpful in recalling and identifying arcane magic-related knowledge, like spells, magic items, or planes of existence. Insight is useful to determine if a person is lying or to discern their mood and intentions. Perception is particularly useful to spot hidden threats or treasures, a skill proficiency that's always good to have. The game explains what every skill does when you select them in your character sheet. The skill proficiencies each class allows you to choose from are a subset of all 18 skills, and again they make sense for the class role. Then we have the armor and weapons proficiencies. No numbers here, just what our character can wear or wield. It's as simple as that. Being proficient only in light armor means you can't wear full plate armor, which is a heavy one. Having simple weapons proficiency but not the martial weapons one means, for example, that you can shoot a short bow but not a long bow. It's all pretty intuitive again, and the game shows it to you pretty clearly. As you can imagine, a rogue can only wear light armors and use simple weapons, while a fighter is proficient in every means of destruction and protection. After that, we have how many spells we can choose at first level, if our class is of the spellcasting type, and the more general class features, which are our class peculiarities. For example, the Cleric spellcasting class feature covers all the information regarding how a cleric learns and uses the spells. It's described in detail as you hover your mouse cursor over the specific feature. Last but not least, we have the standard equipment our class receives at the beginning. It's different for every class, and for now it's set in stone. The first Solasta allowed some choice for it, so they'll probably add some variations going forward. One problem I had with this setup while playing this game is that, if you create a dexterity-based fighter, you start with armor that requires a minimum strength score to be worn that your character probably won't have. So I'm hoping that going on, they'll allow for more variety in the starting equipment section. Moving forward, some classes have an additional section on the bottom of the column for one more choice. The Cleric class asks you to choose your divine order between Protector, for proficiencies in heavy armor and martial weapons, and Thaumaturge, for one extra cantrip and better lore checks. The Fighter class wants you to choose a fighting style between many. For instance, Archery gives you bonus to attack rolls with ranged weapons. Defense gives a flat +1 to armor class, and my favorite, Shielding, allows you, when you have a shield equipped, to use a reaction to grant an ally that's been attacked in a cell adjacent to yours +2 to their RC until their next turn. In the original 5th edition rule set, this fighting style imposed disadvantage on the enemy attack roll, and it's an example of what changed in the rule set upgrade. As a last note on classes, I want to point out that all classes choose their subclass at level 3 in the 2024 rule set. Some of the available subclasses are taken from the SRD, while others are custom subclasses based on the Solasta setting, like the Mana Painter Sorcerer. For now, early access caps your characters at level 4, just one level after choosing your subclass, so it's difficult to have a solid opinion on them. Let's move to selecting our character's ancestry, which again is the race. At the moment, we have only 4 ancestries to choose from, with more to come in the future. We can choose to be a dwarf, an elf, an halfling, or a human. Again, all the information we need is on the right column. We are shown the character speed, here it's in meters. You can choose to use the imperial or metric system in the game options. I prefer the metric one since it's more natural to me. Then we have the additional proficiencies an ancestry may grant. For example, an additional one granted by the Elven lineage, letting you choose a proficiency between the skills Insight, Perception, and Survival. After that, we have the ancestry features, like Dark Vision to see in the darkness, or Fey Ancestry that makes you harder to charm. Finally, we have the languages. All characters speak the common language and have a pool to choose some additional ones from. Some ancestries have a small additional section at the bottom, just like classes, for instance to choose your Elven lineage. Different lineages grant different spells your character always has prepared at specific levels, even if they're from a non-spellcasting class. Or we have an additional origin feat for the human, since they're versatile, which grants a wide array of additional feats to choose from. You can add some low-level magic capabilities, choose to have some basic martial proficiencies, be tougher and much more difficult to kill, deal more damage, or gain 3 additional juicy skill proficiencies for your skill monkeys out there. Then we go to the Backgrounds tab, which allows us to choose what our character did before becoming an adventurer. Backgrounds are more important in the 2024 version of 5th edition, since they let you increase your starting ability scores. Let's have a look at them. Again, all the information we need is on the right column. Here are the ability scores we can improve by choosing the highlighted background. We have 3 points to distribute in total, with a maximum of 2 points to spend on a single ability score. A very common approach is to choose a background that synergizes with the class we've chosen, increasing at least its primary ability from 15 to 16, raising its bonus to +3. More on how abilities scale in a moment. Here we can also see the recommended personality trait for the background, a choice we'll make later under the identity section. Then we see the additional proficiencies we may gain. For example, the academic background automatically makes our character proficient in Arcana and History. It synergizes well with a high intelligence character like a wizard. We also see the tool proficiency the background grants. It may be something related to crafting, which is not implemented yet in early access, or something useful in exploration, like the Thieves Tools proficiency granted by the low-life background. You use this set of tools to open locks and disable traps, and this background allows you to have a character capable of doing it without necessarily being a rogue. It adds more variety to the character creation process. For example, I often like to run a party with a ranger character with a low-life background, to have all the lockpicking and trap-disabling stuff covered, without being forced to have a rogue in the party. Then we have background feat automatically granted. Again, there are a lot of them, and I suggest reading them carefully and choosing one that synergizes well with your character class. For example, adding a few wizard or cleric spells with the appropriate magic initiate feat if you're going for a spellcaster. Finally, we have some additional flavor equipment, in the form of arcane or divine focuses, or foci if you prefer, or various ladders that I imagine will have story relevance for your background quest in the future. The next stage is choosing your character's abilities, the part where I imagine most beginners feel lost. Worry not, and let's have a look at them. Classes have one or more primary abilities, clearly indicated by the game with the star, in which you want to allocate the most points. For instance, the primary ability for a wizard is intelligence. For a fighter is either strength or dexterity, while for a paladin it's both strength and charisma. Those knights in shining armor have to be charismatic other than strong for melee fighting. In this phase, all ability scores start at 8 and have a -1 modifier to them. Common sense suggests raising that primary ability score to 15, the maximum allowed in this phase. Then, a little bit of experience helps. For example, I tend to raise all the remaining attributes to 10 to avoid the nasty -1 malus, even if it's an ability that our class won't necessarily need. I also like to raise Constitution for spellcasters and frontliners, because they need those extra hit points, and spellcasters have to make concentration checks when they have a concentration spell active and are hit by an enemy. If they fail, they drop the spell. Those are spells that usually have prolonged effects over time, like Bless, Shield of Faith, and so on. I could go into detail about what influences concentration, armor class, and attack rolls, but I think that pertains more to a combat mechanics video, not this one. I don't want to overwhelm you, so just listen to my advice if you want, for now. As I often like to say, I'm showing you options, often born from experience, and not forcing you to do things in a specific way. Now we have 27 points to freely distribute among our abilities, and this is a table indicating the ability score progression. Since some of those scores provide higher bonuses, like +2, the points spent to increase them always equal the bonus associated with the target score, with a minimum of 1. For example, increasing an ability score from 8 to 9 costs 1, the minimum cost we're always going to pay, while going from 10 to 11 or from 12 to 13 always costs 1 point. The cost of raising a score from 13 to 14 increases to 2 instead, since the associated bonus with a score of 14 is plus 2. If you are confused, fall back to the standard array. It's a set of ability scores the tabletop game suggests for standardized characters or for beginners. It says to assign a 15, a 14, a 13, a 12, a 10, and an 8 to those abilities. D&D Beyond is a table for those values divided by class, if you want to default to that. I find some of these allocations debatable at best, but it's a start for having a well-rounded party. Once we're done with it, in a very organized manner, we have to allocate the 3 ability points our chosen background granted us. Try to reach a 16 and a plus 3 bonus for your primary attribute here. It makes a tangible difference. Tactical Adventures already said that, by popular demand, they'll introduce the ability to roll your scores instead of defaulting to the point-buy system. Can't wait to go back to the rolling phase like in the original Baldur's Gate of my youth. Now, the game gives us a list of skill proficiencies to choose from. This is a subset of the 12 skills present in the game, taken from what our class, ancestry, background or origin fit allow us to have. Depending on our previous choices, we can see some items on this list grayed out, with the indication of the reason why the proficiency is already granted. Then, we can freely choose our own. Again, I suggest taking what makes sense for the character. For example, maxing out sleight of hand or stealth for a rogue, capitalizing on their primary ability to get the highest bonus possible. That being said, I understand that during this guide I'm suggesting min-max and not all role players like it. But this is a beginner's guide and I'm trying to make your life easier when playing the game for the first time. You're welcome to do a challenge run with the very first result of the rolling system, which may very well be extremely bad when they introduce it. But that's for a point in time when you'll have more experience with the game. Remember that choosing a proficiency in a skill means adding the character proficiency bonus to it, which at creation is always plus 2. Also recall that this bonus will increase at higher character levels. Then, depending on your class, you may have to choose your expertise. For now, only the rogue can do it, but it can be available to other classes they might implement in the future, like the blasted bards. I don't like bards. Anyway, expertise just means you double your proficiency bonus on the selected skills you already have proficiency with. Finally, our last proficiencies are in the languages our character speaks. Again, some may be grayed out due to them being granted by some of our previous choices. Choose what you fancy and let's move on. Now, depending on your class choice, you may also have to choose weapon masteries for the more combat-oriented classes. These masteries are ways to apply a weapon's additional effect on a target you hit and damage when using it. For instance, a shortbow can apply the effect Vex on a successful hit if the attacking character has the relevant weapon mastery for it, granting advantage on the next attack the same character makes on the same target. Advantage means rolling 2d20s instead of 1 and choosing the highest number. If you have some basic knowledge of the game, you immediately see how a weapon mastery with the short bow can be very useful for a rogue, who performs sneak attacks on a target when they have advantage on their attack roll. And the rogue just so happens to have 2 weapon masteries to choose from at first level. Weapon masteries can be freely changed when the party takes a long rest, so you won't be restricted to a specific type of weapon that the game may not have you find relatively soon. This next part may be optional, since fighters or rogues don't have spells to cast, unless you've chosen specific origin features. We start by selecting our character's cantrips, which are level 0 spells that can be cast at will. They are less powerful but unlimited, and raise in power as our character gains levels. Choose what you fancy, but I highly suggest always taking light, since the game takes into account how dark an area is when in combat, and characters without dark vision can suffer from it. Another cantrip I highly recommend is Guidance for the Cleric, which adds 1d4 to any ability check a character is going to take. In the next phase, we may have additional cantrip to choose due to our previous character creation choices. Then, in a similar manner, we choose our first level spells. Clerics and paladins always know the entire spell list, contrary to wizards and sorcerers, so the amount of choices to be made in this phase may vary. I recommend having always prepared the Shield of Faith for clerics and paladins to raise their armor class since they're frontliners, plus Shield and Magic Missile for wizards and sorcerers for better survivability and the ability to always damage heavily armored foes with high armor class. Magic Missile always hits. A word of caution here, don't hit the save button yet, or your character will have the random name, look and personality they got initially assigned. Click on the Edit Appearance Identity on the bottom left, and finally, let's get to the last part of character creation. This can be done at any point, but I prefer to keep it for last. Here we have the more or less usual appearance customization options, divided in body, face, hair, makeup, and identity. If you've played other RPGs before, you know the drill. Otherwise, feel free to explore the options and have fun with it. I normally don't spend a lot of time on character appearance, but I understand that for many players it's a very important part of character creation. Two interesting bits of this process are that we can choose our character's face by selecting 3 face presets and blending between them, and that in the Identity tab we choose their personality. Personality determines the character tone and speech when giving answers, as well as the type of those answers that will appear as dialogue options. It's useful to note that early in the prologue of the game we choose the various characters' roles inside the family, and they are meant to best couple with some determined personality. For example, the Golden Kid supposedly pairs well with the caregiver and hero personalities. We haven't seen a lot of those interactions in early access yet, besides some party and family banter with our brothers, so that's why I'm saying supposedly. And we're done! I hope you find this guide useful. I'm mostly aiming at easing new players into the Solasta 2 systems. While the game is in early access right now, I think the bulk of these mechanics will remain pretty much the same, and this knowledge will carry forward into the full release. The first Solasta game was based on the 5th edition 2014 rule set, in its SRD version, which it followed pretty faithfully. Actually, it's the most faithful RPG I ever seen when it comes to the original material. I have no reason to believe Solasta 2 will be different regarding the 2024 rule set. I mean, it's tactical adventurers' core gameplay experience they're known for by now. I don't see why they should change that. There are a few updates planned with more races and classes to be added and tested during the whole 2026. I'll cover them if they're substantial. I'll probably make another video explaining the combat and its action economy for beginners. I fully understand how overwhelming these systems may be for the uninitiated, and I want the biggest number of people to be able to enjoy these wonderful adventures and stories RPGs allow us to experience. I've made a lot of guides for Baldur's Gate 3 and Rogue Trader that generally went pretty well, so if you have any specific doubt about an aspect of the game, let me know in the comments and I'll try to address it. If my university days taught me one thing, is that for any person asking a question, there might be another 9 staying silent, but that are confused about the same thing. I am Avrengost and I cover Western RPGs regardless of their age or production size. If you're interested in these topics, please subscribe to the channel, it helps a lot. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.